There are a ton of intriguing defensive options in the draft for the Blue Jackets to look at. So I thought today we would look at one of them. We're talking about Alfons Freij, a very intriguing Swedish defensive prospect. And we're talking about him with Sebastian Freij of Dobber Prospects and Locked On NHL Prospect on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms. We're over on YouTube, we're on Sirius XM. Just type us into Google and you will find us wherever you want to listen to us or watch us most. We're doing another prospect profile. It's been a minute since we've done some of these, and I thought, hey, let's get one half of Locked On NHL Prospects back on the show. So today we're talking to Sebastian Freij, head scout over at Dobber Prospects. Like I said, one half of Locked On NHL Prospects. And we're going to talk about Alfons Freij, who is a Swedish defenseman that not a lot of people are talking about. And I wanted to know why that is and why Sebastian and Dobber Prospects have him ranked so high on their board when very few other people do. So I'm just going to get into my conversation with Sebastian all about Alfons Freij. As of right now, the Blue Jackets still only have that 4th overall pick in the upcoming NHL draft. I remain convinced that they're going to try and pick up another late first rounder. I don't know if they're going to keep hold of that second rounder that they might trade to Philly and they might defer to next year. There's a lot up in the air. Who knows what the Blue Jackets are going to do right now? But what I do know is that Sebastian Freij is on the show from Dobber Prospects, and we're going to do a couple more prospect profiles. Going to look at a couple of guys that probably won't be in the conversation at 4th overall, or probably shouldn't be, but could be available if the Blue Jackets manage to pick up a later first round. And these are two names that kind of have been circling around, kind of getting a little bit more traction, I feel like. And it helps that there are a couple of Sebastian's personal favorites. So that's always fun to talk about prospects that you like instead of prospects that you don't like, and then have to pretend that you have nice things to say about them, which is always makes for interesting podcasting. But Sebastian Freij, head scout over at Dobber Prospects. We're going to talk about Alfons Freij today, who is a Swedish prospect who I know that you're really high on, and I'm fascinated by that because it seems like no one else is. So let's start off with just kind of the basics. Like, what kind of player is Freij?
Yeah, so Alfons Freij is listed at 6'1", 196 pounds on Elite Prospects, which is, in my opinion, rather generous. He looks a lot closer to 5'11" and like 170 on the ice. And I'm sure like the reality is somewhere between those two valuations, but he's not very physical at all. Like, he looks a lot smaller and less physically engaged than his frame might make him look to be on paper. He's a tremendously mobile, puck-moving left shot defenseman, extremely fun with the puck on his stick. In terms of players in this draft class on the blue line, if I had to pick like a top 3 left shot defenseman who can move the puck up the ice and create offense and is just a real general from the blue line who I trust in possession, in creating very like creative but also like low risk zone exits, Alfons Freij is easily in that conversation for me. He's super intelligent. He is probably the best mover in the draft in terms of combining skating input and output, in that he gets around the ice really efficiently, and it also looks really good. The stride mechanics are excellent in all 4 directions. He's a really excellent skater. And beyond that, in the offensive zone, he also has a real high playmaking ceiling. He loves to activate up to the hash marks, and he just gets a ton of pucks to the high danger areas. His playmaking output's been extraordinary this season, and he's often thinking play at a higher pace than his teammates because he's played the entire season in J20, so in the Swedish junior ranks with Vahwa, and he's been a teammate of another Swedish defenseman who's going to be picked in the top 2 rounds this year, Leo Salin Belenius, and it means that we've gotten a lot of viewings of those two players like in the same game, So there's a very natural comparison between the two. And for me, it just is not close at all. In my opinion, Alfons Freij is a lot more refined, a lot more intelligent, a lot more projectable, and has a higher ceiling than Leo Salim-Bellenius does, despite being a little bit less physically engaged and not, and like honestly looks smaller, even though he's listed as being bigger by elite prospects. And there's definitely some defensive lacking still, but the high level of intelligence and decent enough stick work, I think, can compensate for that. Like, he's never going to be a shutdown defensive guy, but the offensive output, the transition impact are extraordinary, and I think that there's like top pairing upside with this player. So if you can get him in that like early to mid to late 20s range, or he can fall to the second round, that is excellent value.
I want to talk a little bit about kind of him playing the entire year in J20, because I feel like it's so rare to have a player kind of projected at where he is to not play, a European player that is, to not play men's hockey. But I want to ask, first of all, like, obviously you have him ranked higher than a double prospect. Basically everywhere else has
There's
him
two
ranked,
exceptions.
Has him ranked lower.
There's two exceptions.
And
it's
Tony
Tony Ferrari,
yeah,
who has him top 10, and then there's Will Scout, who has him top 5. So there's definitely two outliers there.
On a different level to basically every other prospect.
Oh yeah,
I feel like, but
big time. He goes against the grain.
For example, Craig Button has him 49, Bob McKenzie has him 50, Chris Peters has him 46. Like, why do you have him so much higher in the rankings than basically every other prospect network out there?
Well, it's a combination of the upside. The raw tools are really high end, whether it be the playmaking, the handling, the skating. Like, they're all way above average, especially the skating. It's very clearly elite. And in the offensive zone, he's so intelligent with how he's able to create advantages for his team, whether he's threatening to create a high danger scoring chance himself in terms of setting up a potential primary assist, or if he's just trying to keep the cycle going. He's really adaptable on the puck, and in transition, for instance, he's such a general when he's launching the breakout. He's a really great transition passer, but also a puck carrier, leading the rush, and he's so consistently just switching lanes, deking one way, going the other. He's so shifty, so elusive, so deceptive. Like, once you're looking beyond the tier of defensemen like Zeev Williams and Zane Parekh, I really do believe that Alfons Freij is the next like dynamic offensive defenseman, and the level of intelligence is a real facilitating factor with that as well. And the defensive game, I would say, is definitely a big reason why a lot of other outlets and scouts have him significantly lower than we do. I believe we had him ranked 16th overall on our most recent rankings in April, and he's going to stick in that like 13 to 20 range for us for our final rankings in all likelihood. And for me, a lot of that's, I think a lot of other outlets see that lack of physicality, the lack of defensive engagement, the bit of inconsistency as well defensively. He's really consistent offensively and on puck, but the defensive impact, and there have been viewings where it just hasn't been very good. That said, I do think that he will rise his stock because of his performance at the U18 World Championships. He was very clearly Sweden's best defenseman in that tournament. Like Leo Salim-Bellenius may have played like a couple more minutes. I think it was really those two that were just absolutely leading the pack in minutes played for that Sweden U18 team. But Alfons Freij was the one that in my eyes was making like real consistent impact on both sides of the puck in that tournament too. He had a bit of a stinker against Canada in the first game of the tournament, but after that game, he really picked it up, while Leo Salim-Bellenius got increasingly more inconsistent as the tournament wore on, and Freij picked up his game in the important games.
In a minute, we're going to talk to Sebastian more about Alfons Freij, but first, I've got to tell you all about Policygenius. Life insurance is a really important safety net for you and your family, but I know trying to find the right policy is time-consuming, it's overwhelming, it's so friggin' confusing that I don't even know where to start. Well, start with Policygenius. You can find life insurance policies there that start at just $292 a year for $1 million of coverage, and some of these options even offer things like same-day approval, so you don't have to wait around. You can avoid unnecessary medical exams as well, which is choice, if you ask me. Policygenius is convenient, it's time-saving, they do all the work. You just answer a couple of questions and they will give you a quote. and or several quotes, and you can find your favorite in just a few clicks. You might not be as well covered as you think right now. Your work-life insurance policy might not offer enough protection for you and your family's needs, and if you end up leaving your job for any reason, it might not come with you. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They've got no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance and join thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description below to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. Once again, that's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. Let's go back to that kind of J20 league, because obviously I feel like if you're like when you look at highly ranked Swedish prospects, almost all of them are playing in the SHL, for example, or they're playing overseas
Split.
or outside. But like, why do you have him ranked so highly when he's been playing at J20? Is it like, or not necessarily why do you have him ranked so highly? Like, is it a case of he's just that much better than his teammates at that level? Like, could you see him, like, is he capable of taking that next jump and being an impact player at the men's league, like, as early as, October?
I really think he can be, and I think a lot of it goes down to very consistently every single game I watched of him, and I watched like double-digit games of Alfons Freij this season. Every game, he was a step above every other player on the ice in terms of processing the game, in terms of consistency and creating and generating offense. As a defenseman, he was doing it more consistently than any other forward on the ice on either team in the vast majority of my viewings. And I think that that level of consistency in being so creative and being so dynamic and having an understanding of the time and space he has to work with and working within that framework, but he's not one to hang on to pucks too long. He's patient when he can be, but he's not going to be one of those players that is completely overwhelmed by the pressure he faces when he does make that leap to the men's game. I really think it will be relatively smooth, likely in like a bottom 3 defenseman role to start, obviously in the SHL, but in that type of sheltered role with a veteran pairing mate, I think that Alfons Freij could be a really dynamic offensive creator right off the bat and likely raise his way up in that lineup as that season progresses.
I feel like, unless I'm forgetting someone, which I very much might be, I've done a lot of these prospect profiles and they all kind of blur together after a while. I feel like Freij is kind of the highest ranked Swedish player.
Yeah.
Give or take, personal rankings or whatever. And I'm wondering, like, is it a case of, because obviously last year they had Leo Carlson coming out of Sweden. The year before they had that trio of Lekarimäki, Östlund, and Ögren. I feel like there's not as many impact Swedish players this season, and I'm probably forgetting an impact Swede that was taken in the last couple of drafts, but I could only remember so many things at once. Please don't hold this against me if you're watching this in Sweden and you're mad that I forgot about one of your favorite players that went like 12th overall. But are they just in like a weird lull with Swedish players at the minute? I feel, or is it a case of other nations are kind of picking it up? Obviously, we talked about Brandtek Nygaard, who is Austrian, I want to say.
He is Norwegian.
Norwegian. There we go. I was like, it's definitely one of the Scandinavian countries that is less like kind of on the rise. Like, is Sweden kind of on a down year with prospects this year, or is it that every other country has kind of picked up?
It's a down year. It's not a down trend. Next draft Swedish class is obscenely strong. You're going to see a couple like real good top 10 Swedish picks next year. Anton Frondell is like a 6'3", like power forward, could play down the middle. Reminds me a little bit of like D-1 Leo Carlson in some senses, stylistically a bit different, but there's some similarities there. He's already been playing some good professional hockey as well. And then you also have Victor Eklund next season, who's William Eklund's younger brother. He's a ton of fun. High motor, really skilled, super dynamic, great skater, ton of fun. He's playing in Hockey Allsvenskan with Djurgården this season, and I watched him a lot while scouting Linus Eriksson, who's another one of my favorite Swedes in this draft class. He's a really projectable, like potential third-line center. very intelligent, really like just solid and very easy to see in an NHL role in just a couple years time. But yeah, like Alfons Freij is my top ranked Swede. I have two other Sweden-based players in my first round, apart from Frey. One who you alluded to already in Michael Brandstad-Nygård, and the other in Dominik Badinka, a Czech right-shot defenseman. Really good skater, very good breakout passer. I could see him be a solid NHLer in a couple of years' time. And yeah, beyond that, you have a lot of question marks, like players that have some really intriguing qualities coming out of Sweden this season, but in my opinion, aren't first-round talents. Leo Salin-Valenius would be one of those. Another really like creative offensive defenseman, but the decision-making woes with him are rather concerning in my eyes, and that's the big difference between him and Alfons Freij, for instance, because they're both very toolsy. They're both offensively creative. They're both very good skaters. But Freij is just so consistently reading the game intricately and making decisions based off of those reads. Leo Salin-Valenius is just yeeting himself into every game. And it can be very entertaining and very frustrating, depending on the viewing. And beyond that, you have Alexander Zetterberg, who kind of lit up the U18 World Championships for Sweden as like a power play scorer. He's 5'8", like $160. He's really undersized, but like with the puck on the stick, great puck handler, really fun to watch. But the projection there's some question marks there. So the skill level's high, but I wouldn't pick him in that top 40 range personally. And the last two Swedes I'll mention for this year's draft class would be Simon Zetter, who's another intelligent, projected defensive centerman in a bottom six capacity. But he scored a lot of points in like 20-something J20 games this season. He played most of the season in the SHL. In like a shutdown defensive role in the fourth line. But when he played junior, he racked up the points, but he needs space to work with to really make an impact. So I don't know how projectable that offense really is at the end of the day. But he's a good net front presence, and I think he'll get picked in like the top 45 range because he's so easy to see in an NHL role in just like 2 years. And the last guy, Lucas Pettersson, very speedy winger, quite creative on the puck, good puck handler, but when he's at slower paces and he slows his game down, he becomes rather ineffective. He needs to be moving at higher speeds to be dangerous, which makes him a raw rush creator on the cycle. He can be shut down relatively easily, which in my view makes him like a 50 to 70 range pick rather than a top 50 guy. But yeah, there's some interesting players in this Swedish class, but it's definitely a bit of a lull year in terms of overall quality, especially if we're comparing that to the last couple seasons where we've just seen a breadth of talent coming out of Sweden.
Yeah, and I feel like it's kind of unfair to be like, well, no one is as good as Leo Carlsson, because like I spent so much time watching Leo Carlsson last season because I was convinced he was going to be a Blue Jacket, you know, and obviously it didn't shake out that way. Thrilled to get Fantilli as a Blue Jacket, but I spent so much time looking at Carlsson, and now I'm looking at the Swedish players, and I'm like, man, there's not really anyone that matches up there. But that does feel like an unfair matchup to make. I want to talk a little bit more about like Freij as a like how he projects. You said kind of in that beginning bit that you could see him. He has top pair upside. What's your realistic kind of obviously top pair potential, but how likely is that potential to hit? You know, do you see him as a guy that is probably going to play in like a number 2 defenseman, or do you think he'll probably be a really great second pair defenseman, or like what's your best guess for where he lands in terms of the defenseman ladder, let's say?
Yeah, I think like if I'm going optimistically, I'd be saying number 2 defenseman. I like him a lot. Like the on puck skill is excellent. The intelligence is so good, and he has such an amount of tools to support the way he plays the game, which I think will serve him so well when he's jumping up those levels of play to the SHL and then eventually to the NHL. But if I'm hedging my bets a little bit, I'd probably say more like a really good number 3 defenseman would be the safer bet here. But that room for upside beyond that, like that likely projection is also something that I would value. And it's one of the reasons I have him ranked in that like 9 to 18 range. I have a tier between 9 and 18 that you could almost put in a blender still at this stage in the draft cycle. And I wouldn't really mind however it shook out. It's been a real headache for me to sort. They've separated themselves from the pack both above them and below them, but within that tier, I don't know. And Alfons Freij is right in the thick of it. So he's currently at 11 on my board, but he's been at like 17 in like a couple of weeks ago, and he could be at 18 in a couple of weeks' time. So that's one of the areas in the draft that I'm still like getting a lot of viewings on to really pin down exactly where. But if you have the opportunity to draft any of the players I have in that range, including Alfons Freij, past that 20th overall selection, I'd be running to the podium to do it. I think that he's a really targeted bet for that upside type of swing because he has so many of the check boxes that you look for. He also has a fair share of like leadership qualities. Like whenever Sweden at the U18s needed a defenseman on the ice to create anything, create something, even if it were to like shut down some things defensively, he got sent out there sometimes. And it wasn't because he's the best defensive player in the world. It's because as soon as he gets the puck on his stick, possession is retained. And the best way to play defense is to not give up the puck. And he's very, very good at that type of defense. The other type of defense is more of a work in progress still, obviously. But I think that like number 3 defenseman upside would be like, if a team drafts him and fans ask me what can we reasonably expect of this player in terms of like the upside and the projection, number 3 would be my answer.
I guess let's look at that kind of within the lens of the Blue Jackets and their kind of defensive prospect pool, which is kind of still bonkers. Where do you have him kind of fitting in with, you know, the likes of, they've got David Jiricek, they've got Denton Matejchuk, they've got Stanislav Svozil, who I'm really high on. Corsten Kuhlmans gets forgotten about all the time. You know, Samuel Kanazko gets forgotten about. I think he's kind of slid a little bit. He had a lot of injury concerns this year, his first year pro. And they might take a defenseman at 4th overall as well. So, like, if they end up with Freij kind of in that mix as well, where do you see him kind of falling in that pool of just so many defensemen?
Yeah, I mean, if Columbus is going out for Anton Salayev at number 4, I don't think you're going to be recommending a pick on Alfons Freij. Because then what's the point in terms of you're getting a defenseman that's projecting as maybe a number 2 and likely a second pairing guy and a left shot at that. Stylistically, extraordinarily different. Like they couldn't be more different stylistically. But in terms of role and where they fit on that depth chart, they'd be relatively comparable. I have them in the same tier. I currently have Alfons Freij above Anton Salayev, but if I take in mind like the other Blue Jackets players, obviously David Jiricek on the right side is hopefully going to be the projected first pairing right D long term. But on that left side, it's a bit more interesting to me because you have a lot of names. There's just a glut of players. Obviously, you have Zach Werenski still under contract for a good while as well. But it would be between Denton Matejchuk and Alfons Freij for me. I think it'd be a bit of a coin toss of which of those two would project as like the number 2 and who would be the number 3 or 4 between those two guys. But obviously be a safer bet right now to say Matejchuk because he's closer to the NHL and has just played a ridiculously good season. So that would be a pretty intelligent bet. And obviously it was a dominant Moose Jaw Warriors team, but I like Alfons Freij a lot. I think the raw upside, like I would take draft your Alfons Freij over draft your Denton Matejchuk, and I like draft your Denton Matejchuk a lot. So, but they're very much in the same range. So between those two guys, I don't know if Alfons Freij makes the most sense in terms of wanting to diversify the prospect pool in Columbus, but it's already such a stacked prospect pool in basically every position. It doesn't really matter. You just want to take the asset that you believe in, that you can see progressing, that you can see having a lot of value as well in a couple of years, because you're never going to keep every single one of these prospects. Some of them are going to get moved in a couple of years' time when you're entering a window of potentially contending for a wild card spot. You're going to flip a couple prospects for some guys that are a bit further along the road in their development. But yeah, I think Alfons would be a fascinating choice, especially because of that depth chart. It would be a real sign that this whichever management group for Columbus takes care of the draft does not really care about doubling down on already like strong positions in the prospect pool and just going for pure value, which I'm honestly a fan of. It will create some headaches down the road, but they're headaches that you kind of want to have because you're going to have excess value. And
Right.
as
Oh
long
no,
as
we
you
have too
believe
many
in that
good young
player.
players. Like,
Oh no, how terrible, right?
Yeah.
Which is only an issue if you hold on to them for too long until like you can't sign them and you're losing that value completely. But as long as you manage those assets intelligently, that's kind of what you want to get out of a rebuild, right? You want your cupboards to be absolutely packed and overflowing. You don't want them to be bare.
Yeah, for sure. Now, if I had done this properly, what I would have done is gone back to the last time that I had you on the show and asked you who you would take at 4th overall, because for the life of me, I cannot remember who you said you were going to pick, and I feel like you maybe said Ivan Demidov would
Yeah,
go at 4th
I
overall.
probably would have said, yeah, that would have been my likely pick.
It's all pointing towards him going maybe 2nd to the Hawks or 3rd to the Ducks. So if he's off the board, who do you have at 4th on your board at the minute? Does that make sense for the Blue Jackets? Like, if they call you up and they're like, "Hey, 1, 2, and 3 are gone," so let's, for the sake of argument, let's say Celebrini, Demidov, Levshinov. Who are you taking at 4th?
Yeah. It's between 2 players, and it's basically a coin toss for me between those two. And those would be Caden Lindstrom and Tisha Ginla. I'm a very big fan of Tisha Ginla. I think that he'd be just about as great a compliment to Adam Fantilli as you could hope to find at 4th overall. He can do everything. He's going to be a coach's favorite. He's likely going to win a roster spot in about a year's time and play a top 9, top 6 role from that point onwards. The high motor with him is just like suffocating. He's the best board player in the entire draft class, despite being one of the youngest players in the draft class and not being overly big. He's 6 feet, 185 pounds, but he's so violent and very, very physically engaged and capable in that facet of the game. He has a wicked shot. He's one of the better playmakers in the draft class. He's a great forechecker. He's an energetic back checker. The defensive reads are not very refined as of yet, but the energy is overflowing in that capacity as well. Coaches are going to adore him. He has that like top line upside as like not like the primary offensive driver on a top line, but like a secondary offensive driver on a top line. And when you have Adam Fantilli, I think that works brilliantly.
You're really just looking for a guy to play with Adam Fantilli at this
point.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? And the other option here, Caden Lindstrom, just massive. Like he's 6'3", 216 pounds. He can play down the middle or on left wing, so he has that positional versatility. Tisha Ginla is also going to be playing down the middle next season for the Kelowna Rockets. So these are 2 players that have that positional versatility, which is nice to have in the cupboard. But Lindstrom has a really hard shot. He gets to the dangerous areas. He's a lot less refined, I would say, than Tisha Ginla is at this stage, but he has a lot more runway. And he was injured for a decent chunk of the season, but when he was on the ice, he was getting the puck a ton on a dominant Medicine Hat Tigers team that didn't need to give him the puck as much as they did, but they trusted him to, and he was consistently creating with the puck on his stick. And the defensive impact, a little bit like Tisha Ginla, effort levels there, flashes of really good defensive reads, but the actual understanding of defensive systems is certainly still growing. But those would be the 2 players that I would be taking a big swing on at number 4 if Ivan Demidov is off the board. And I still think there's like a 30 to 40% chance he'll be available. And I'm personally hoping he drops to number 5 because my Montreal Canadiens are picking there, and I think he'd be precisely the piece that organization needs to take the next jump. But you really can't go wrong. Like I have a tier going from 3 to 8, and it's also a bit like interchangeable still. Like you have a lot of players that have tremendous upside and also reasonably high floors. Like you have some riskier bets in there too, like Berkeley Catton and Zane Perek, but they'd also be awesome picks at number 4. I'd have no complaints there whatsoever either. But yeah, lots of options here.
Yeah. So Lindstrom has been a personal favorite basically since I started doing my draft prep for this season. I'm like, yes, this is the boy that I would like to win at the draft in Vegas. Tisha Ginla, I feel like in literally a matter of months has gone from he could be available for the Flames like he could be a choice for the Flames at 14th overall or whatever to maybe he'll drop to 7th and the Ottawa Senators will take him, and now he's maybe in the conversation for 4th overall, which is just a wild trajectory.
I have him at 3
last month.
Yeah, I like him a ton, and every single scout I've talked. He's a fun player, and beyond just being fun and dynamic and so versatile, he can play just about every role very, very well. Uh, he he's so projectable as well, and every skit I've talked to about him just raves. Like everybody that's watched him significantly adores him, and he's so young for the draft class. He's an August birthday. Obviously has a little bit of an elite hockey lineage as well, which doesn't hurt whatsoever. But yeah, like he's a player that I'd be very happy to swing on at fifth overall as well for the Canadians. So he'd be an excellent bet at fourth overall, especially when you compare him with a guy like Fantilli, who is like the perfect stylistic fit for TG Ginla.
Yeah, TG Ginla, Adam Fantilli, Gavin Brindley, tearing the NHL apart. You heard it here first. If people want
funnest line in the league,
more,
potentially.
If people want to learn more about kind of the upcoming draft, if they want to get more into your specific prospect rankings, where can people find you and your work online?
Yeah, so we're posting a ton of episodes right now at Locked On NHL Prospects, which you can find on YouTube or every podcasting platform where you're finding this podcast as well. We just made a mock draft for top 23. We also broke down Bob McKenzie's rankings just recently. And for my personal work, you can find that over on Twitter, _Sebastian on Twitter. And I'll be posting my personal top 100 rankings there in June with a ton of write-ups to go with each single ranking as well. And last but not least, Dauber Prospect, which you can find either online on the website or on Twitter. We are going to get our top 128 ranking done there as well in early June. We have an awesome team of scouts, really hardworking, dedicated people that are just wonderful to work with as well. So we're very excited to bring you our final ranking of the season, which is going to be the final little cherry on the cake of a lot of work done for the 2024 NHL draft class.
And that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing another season review. Yep, that's the word. We're talking about Ivan Provorov and how his first season with the Blue Jackets went. We'll talk the good, bad, ugly of his season, give out a grade, and talk about what his future on the team could look like. Thank you for listening to this episode, though, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, for being an everydayer. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.